Yo, what's going on? Hey, this episode is going to be a very interesting discussion this Friday. It's probably more of an attorney reaction as we're going to look at some of the legalities of what's going on with this wild case. But as always, there's definitely a financial nexus here that we'll get to talk about, but definitely much more of a litigation attorney reaction case. I'm Marcus, you're at the channel The Debt Free Dad, where we're talking finances, attorney reactions, current events, and I'm keeping y'all posted as my family is on our journey to financial freedom. Okay, now let's start off by just laying out the core foundation of what we got going on today. Y'all probably saw the thumbnail and y'all probably thought, man, did this dude put smashed in the title? But hey, that's what happened. Hey, we gotta keep things where everyone can relate and look at that headline and know exactly what happened or what is going on. So we're going to take a look at the story that's going on in the news regarding Meagan Hall. Meagan Hall is a police officer who is in Tennessee, or was a police officer it was in Tennessee, and they had some wild stuff going on down there at the Laverne Police Department. Okay, so it was Meagan Hall. She was a new officer. I believe she was 24 when she started being an officer. She ends up getting into several sexual relationships with 7 persons on the police force. Now, there's some question as to whether or not, hey, was this a consensual thing? Was there something going on? I'm gonna tell y'all, I did kind of a deep dive because I didn't want to talk about something that I didn't know all of the facts. Okay, so I actually pulled up the actual complaint and a few things, okay? One is it did change my mind about how I view this case because I have more information. That's point number one. Point number two, her attorneys who wrote that complaint, hey, I drafted a lot of legal memoranda in my day, a lot of documents for the court. Hey, kudos to them. It was a very well written brief. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to go to the complaint. We're going to talk about some of the allegations, and we're going to talk about what is going on and how this will likely play out. And I already know it's not going to play out favorable for the guys involved. I tell you that off the cuff. That's, hey, it is what it is, but you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Okay, now the finance lesson here, okay, this is an important finance lesson, and I think is applicable to men, I think is applicable to women. In this situation, we probably see it a little bit more with the fellas, but this is applicable across the board. As a general rule, my father told me this a long time ago. You want to keep your privates and your wallet completely separated at all times. What does that mean in layman's terms? Don't dump where you sleep at. Okay, if you're getting your money here at job A, if this money is helping you eat, why would you take a dump where you're eating at? You're gonna just contaminate things. It's gonna get messy. You're gonna get sick. You're gonna end up finding yourself in some wild ass situation like these officers have found themselves in. And I'll tell you, initially I had questions regarding how the investigation was being done. But after I read the complaint, I will tell you, uh, hey, what's going on, sis? I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you. After listening and reading the complaint, I will tell you the reservations I had with the investigative process have come to a screeching halt. I think that for the most part, what I saw, I think that the investigation was probably done on kind of was kind of on the up and up. What's good, brother? How you feeling, man? But so we're gonna dive into it. Let's go into the news article first. But the financial point, because we're gonna lose that early. This is gonna dive and take a hard turn to legal analysis and attorney reaction. But the financial point is keep your private and your wallet separate. Ladies, fellas, it's probably generally a good rule to not have relationships with people you work in, especially if you have a superior position within the organization. A lot of times, and my guy Wolverine pointed this out when me and him was chopping it up. A lot of times people say, "Oh, well, they were consenting adults, so no harm, no foul. That's BS, okay? There is a reason that rules are in place, especially related to superior and subordinate relationships. Because if you're in a superior position, there is an imbalance of power. That imbalance of power is automatically going to look at, in the legal world, they like to call it undue influence. It's pressure. That's what undue influence is. It's pressure. If I'm uh, the head coach of the Boston Celtics, who was sleeping with some women or a woman there and ended up losing his job. If you're the head coach and you're sleeping with some woman who's the equipment manager, think about how that's going to be perceived. If that person doesn't get a promotion or does get a promotion, the question is going to be, was it because of this relationship? If someone else outside of that relationship doesn't get a promotion, the first thing they're going to say is, I didn't get that promotion because I'm not sleeping with the coach. It just creates a world of power. That's why you see in most business organizations, there is always internal policies against superiors and subordinates. You can't do that. We know from the military, you can't, no fraternization. You cannot fraternize. Hey. Alleged harlot, okay? We got to be legally. I don't want nobody coming to try to sue DFD, okay? She's an alleged harlot, okay? Hey, I'm gonna be honest, man. I was leaning one way until I read the complaint and I saw the details of the investigation, and I was like, now, of course, the other side can file an answer, but just on his face, there's a little bit of alleged harlot maybe trying to get a bag there, but a lot of this falls on the stupidity of the guys in questions. Keep your privates and your wallet separate. Keep your privates in your purse, your privates in your wallet, your privates in your fanny pack. Always keep that stuff separate. It just never works out well, says the guy who married a woman who he worked with. But that's different though, okay? That was a completely different situation. It wasn't a superior subordinate relationship. So, hey, don't do what I do what I say, okay? Most times it's not going to end up in a happy ass marriage, okay? Hey, I'll just keep it real. Most times, most times it's not going to end up like that. Just take that as a cautionary tale. This is the situation of do what I say, not what I did, but it wasn't a superior subordinate relationship. So y'all don't come for me in the comments, but that's hilarious. I was like, man, who is that soldier over there? Okay, let's go and pull up the video so we can get the background, and then I want to go through and read a little bit about the complaint because, hey, like I told y'all, my mind was over here, but when I read the complaint and the investigation, and really the chief of police, he was the one who really put everybody. One, he could have avoided everything, but he was the biggest knucklehead once I read the complaint. So let's go and pull up the video so we can see what's going on.
Police Department. 5 officers and the police chief all fired.
One of those officers, Meagan Hall, became the face of the scandal and the target of nationwide ridicule. She's now filed a federal lawsuit.
Tonight, in an exclusive interview with our Nick Barris, Hall describes a toxic workplace behind closed doors and how sexual misconduct spiraled out of control.
Hold on, real quick before we dive into, okay? I'm gonna tell y'all this story. It's a good old story. When I was 16, I wanted to go to a house party. I don't know if that was a Wolverine. I don't know if Wolverine. I don't know if he went to that house party, but I once asked my father, was like, hey, what time do I have to be in? And he was like, oh, you ain't got no curfew. And I was 16. I was like, damn, I ain't got no curfew. He's like, yeah, just remember, if something happens, you fit the description. And I was like, what? I was like, what? I had to think about it. I was like, oh, you fit the description. Let's take a look at this background right here, okay? Now, keep in mind, there were 7 officers involved. You see 5 of them on the screen because they're talking about officers who were fired. Remember the song on Sesame Street? I think it was one of these things. Look at this. Look at that picture beside me. And what is the common denominator with that picture and all those people who got fired. There were other people involved in this too, and none of them got fired. None of them got fired. They got suspended. Everybody on that wall black as hell, with the exception of Mr. Perez. But Mr. Perez, your last name is Perez, so they gonna throw you in there too. Okay, so this is one thing we gotta point out because unfortunately it is what it is. It weren't just Mr. Perez and 4 brothers involved in this. There was some Caucasians involved in this too, but they all got suspended. All of these yahoos lost their job. Now, there is a reason where I can see why the conduct that they were involved in was more egregious, but that's something we got to take note of. Hey, all the brothers and Mr. Perez, you a brother too. Y'all all lost y'all job. And when we go through this lawsuit and look at the named parties, the named parties is all going to have a little bit of melanin in their system. So that's just something we got to know so we can get the details of how this is playing out.
Meagan Hall was 24 years old when she was hired as an officer here at the Laverne Police Department 2 years ago. Her plan was to have a career in law enforcement. She now knows that dream is likely over.
I remember while interviewing for the position.
Okay, real quick pause. Again, I got to give credit to her attorneys. Her attorneys wrote a very detailed, well-written brief. It was easy to read. And it was long. I read probably about 70% of it, but that damn thing was long. But it was interesting. Like, I actually want to go back and read it. But you'll see, and when we go through, there's stories and facts about Miss Hall being on a boat and, tattoos and girls gone wild when she was the only girl, pouring alcohol down her mouth. Her attorney did exactly the right thing. She looks like a school teacher from the 70s right now. Put on the glasses, put on something really conservative. So this is all an image thing. That's just part of the game. I'm sure she didn't look like this in any of the damn text messages and everything else that was going around. But for purpose of this, her attorneys understood the assignment, what they needed to do, because right now is all about presenting the image.
However, while I was aspiring to protect my community, the Laverne Police Department was not protecting me.
By now, most of the country knows what happened. All 4 other officers and the police chief were fired last month. This after 2 separate investigations found that Hall engaged in sexual activity and or shared intimate photos and videos with several male officers. The chief and 2 sergeants were among those implicated. Now Hall and her attorney, Wesley Clark, are suing those 3 supervisors and the city in federal court for civil rights violations.
Megan wasn't looked at like a rookie cop to be trained and promoted. She was looked at as a piece of meat to be sexualized and exploited.
Since the story broke, Hall, the lone female officer fired and only woman on the second shift, became a target nationwide for sexual jokes and taunting.
I received harassing and threatening messages on my phone daily. I felt like I'd been terrorized.
And yes, now she is suing. No criminal charges have been filed in the case. Hall knows there are those who will say she was a consenting adult who willingly participated in sexual antics in violation of police department policy, and that now she wants to blame others, including one sergeant who targeted her early on.
I know what most people are saying. They said no. But my response to them is that I did say no, and he wouldn't take it for an answer. Eventually, I gave in for pressure.
So it's not as easy to say she could have just said no.
She did say no on several occasions. Miss Hall tried to get out of this relationship, and she was not allowed to.
Hall concedes she participated under duress. She's not saying she was raped, but adds that the salacious details made public of sex on the job put her alone center stage and do not tell the whole story.
They isolated me, shunned me, they accused me, and they blamed me for becoming a victim.
Hall suffered from depression to the point of considering suicide, and at one point was hospitalized. She felt trapped.
My supervisors worked together to take advantage of my vulnerabilities and my mental health. And they used it for their gain and sexual pleasure.
And that included the police chief, Chip Davis. The independent investigation found he was aware of what was going on.
Yeah, he was the biggest idiot.
Intimate photos and videos of Hall.
Who do you even turn to when the chief of police is sexually harassing you? How could I get justice when the entire system, including the chief, not only condoned such behavior, but participated? I was lost and I felt alone. I had no one to turn to, and I had nowhere to go.
Hall now realizes her career in law enforcement is likely over, and she knows those ugly memes on social media will remain forever. Reputation sullied.
No woman should ever have to endure this type of abuse. What happened to me during my employment at the Lawrence Police Department, it should never happen to anyone.
Hall now hopes to put what happened to her here at the Laverne PD behind her. She is married and says she has a strong family support system. She says that it was her faith that helped carry her through the turmoil. Nick Barris, News Channel 5.
Nick, thank you. Hall's federal lawsuit names two.
Man, that's rough, son. Man, oh, this is a wild story. This is a wild story, and I wanted to just go to this all quick. These photos of the other individuals who were involved, but who were only suspended. So, you know, we see there's a lot of melanin. All the melanin is in the lawsuit and was in that news story we just saw. But, you know, they all had no melanin, so to speak. And, you know, they all kind of just skated. They all, not skated, but they all just got suspended. I couldn't find specifically, but I'm going to go ahead and say that there's a strong possibility that they actually got suspended with pay. That's typically the name of the game, how it goes. They're like, you know what? We're going to suspend y'all, but we're going to still make sure y'all get that bag. Let's see. Nah, man, it wasn't that party, man. It was a different party. Yeah, he wanted to feel all the dancing sensation. You must. I know, that's funny. I know, man. That lawsuit was black as hell. And yeah, that was a thing that came up. The OnlyFans was something that came up. But being the superior, you just can't do it. I agree 100%. Anybody who worked in any military or law enforcement is just a recipe for disaster. Because all it takes is one matter of time. Hold something. I'm telling y'all right now, I'm not the black male type. Like, I'd be damned. I wish somebody would hold something on. I tell them myself. I was like, nope, you're not gonna hold it over my head. But these is the real things that happen. Yeah, I mean, transferring is an option, but like, I mean, I don't know the makeup of this town, but I mean, when we go through the complaint, it appears that she actually made complaints to the police chief and they dropped the ball. But this is interesting because we're talking about burner accounts for cell phones. We're talking about trying to misdirect the investigation. OnlyFans, Feet Finder. I didn't even know that was a thing. But like this whole lawsuit is kind of crazy. Her story is sketch. In that article, I wasn't going to go through it, but one of the officers who were involved, he probably has the best defense to all of this because she was she was apparently enamored with his manhood and went around bragging about you know, hey, you know how they, you know what they say, she, you know, when she went black, she couldn't go back. She went around bragging about it. This brother, this may be the one situation where his genitalia may be the cause of him actually getting out of trouble, because there does appear to be some witness testimony about her bragging with her sexual relationship, which would kind of just destroy her entire argument as it relates to this guy. Those other bastards, hey, it's not looking good. Oh man, yeah. I mean, that's small. It sounds like I'm assuming it's a small ass town, right? And I mean, like, I'm assuming it's a small. Hey, it's a network, man. Cops are just like every other group of people, they got an organization. It's kind of an organization, a group, a crew. And what they're gonna do, they're gonna try to look out for each other. So, you know, a little bit of background, and I'll talk about it, and we'll cover this when we go through the complaint. But she ended up losing her job. After she lost her job, she talked about the emotional distress, which I agree, probably some emotional distress there. Now, if she was the cause of it and that's a whole different story. But she talks about the emotional distress of memes and all of these websites and Reddit posts that popped up and developed. And so she gets fired. She can only get a job at a local restaurant. She's working at the restaurant, and I think she was there for 2 to 3 weeks before she ends up getting fired because I mean, she can't work there. It's just so much media, so much news broadcasters coming through. If I'm a restaurant, I don't want the thought, I don't want the alleged, I don't want the alleged thought to be getting all this press while people sitting here trying to enjoy their coffee and pancakes. It's just a bad look. It's just a bad look overall. Hey man, sometimes, hey man, that Officer Powell is the one. Officer is Powell is the one who probably had the best argument to get out because, like I said, she, hey, she had to speak about the BBC apparently, the British Broadcasting. Y'all know. But yeah, she couldn't stop talking about it, and that's the only time that a man's you know what is actually probably gonna get him out of trouble. normally it works the other way around. Normally it works the other way around. But let's go ahead, take a look at the complaint. I'm gonna read some of it. I'm not gonna read all of it, but it is very interesting. And the distinction of why the other officers got suspended and all of these guys got fired, it really relates to their role on the force. All of these guys on the force were in leadership positions. You had sergeants, people who had a duty and an obligation to take care of their subordinates, the police chief, who was the biggest idiot. But that's essentially the reason. Yeah, they make memes about they make memes about everything. But that's essentially the reason why those guys all got fired, and the few guys who didn't get fired, they weren't even named in the lawsuit because they didn't have that position of power. And that position of power is going to be an important factor in the charges that they're alleging. I mean, if we're on equal footing, I can't say that you necessarily used your position to entice me or force me to do something, as opposed to, like what we both privates, you know what I mean? We both buck sergeants or something. You can't do anything for me. I can't do anything for you. So that's really the reason why they up there. And, considering this is a small town, it could just be, excuse me, it could just be random that there's a bunch of brothers and a Mexican guy up there or a brother of Hispanic descent up there. But I don't think that's a coincidence either. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this complaint. This complaint is going to be interesting, okay? So, Meagan Olivia Hall, and I hate the way she spells her name. It really bothers me. But look at how they started this out. Simply beautiful, because they're immediately trying to paint the picture to the reader, to the court, to potentially anybody who hears this, is that Meagan Hall was a vulnerable and optimistic 24-year-old woman who had applied to the police force. She was a woman who applied to the police force, but you got to put vulnerable, optimistic in there because right here is important to make her seem as naive as possible. All right, but let's get down. Jurisdiction and venue is filed in federal court because, again, there are federal violations, blah, 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 equal protection clause. All right, factual allegation. Plaintiff Meagan Hall was a woman who graduated from Middle Tennessee State. She applied for a job in 2020. She was 24 years old. Again, this is something that I got to give her attorneys credit for. She was 24 years old, 5'4" and weighed approximately 135 pounds. Because as they describe the other people, the first thing they're going to do is put their height and weight in there because the whole thing is we're going to paint a picture of imbalance of power, imbalance of physical power, imbalance of power within their position. Okay. Now, here's where it gets interesting, okay? Now, we're going to have to look at the Of course, the other side is going to come back with a brief, but this is very important. All right, part of her application process at LPD requires candidates to undergo a psychological evaluation. Ms. Hall expressed concerns about the psychological evaluation to Sergeant Ty McGowan because Ms. Hall had a history of mental health problems, including alcohol abuse, anxiety, depression, and self harm. Sergeant McGowan told Ms. Hall the specific questions that would be asked and instructed her to lie about her history of mental health problems. Ms. Hall was later hired in February of 2021. She was assigned to the second shift. And like we saw in the video, she was the only woman who was in the unit. Okay. Now, hey, that's another big thing right there. Okay. If one, that Officer McGowan is an idiot if he instructed her to do that. That should have been a huge red flag that required her to disclose. But if this is true, hey, she's laying out a perfect foundation to say that, hey, she has a weakened mental state due to mental health issues. And it goes through actually later on where they'll lay out the 7 key characteristics. And it's funny because I'm familiar with these because I work, rape cases, sexual assault cases, but the 7 characteristics of a predator. And they really laid it out beautifully, even though there is some BS in here. It's going to be interesting to see what the answer is. Okay. From the beginning of her employment, Ms. Hall experienced a workplace environment permeated with sexual innuendo and sexual behavior, but not limited to male officers routinely discussing sexual preferences, male officers describing to Ms. Hall's superior officers that they wanted to take care of her and, eat the box and do all of that stuff. Hey, y'all know how fellas are. They could be a little trifling and disgusting at times. I'm going to call cap on this because this made no sense to me. I read this twice. 2 male officers shared with one another within Ms. Hall's presence and while on duty photographs of their penises. Like, I don't know if I'm finding that hard to believe that these guys who all had a relationship with her, there was nothing that remotely said anything about anything that would give you any clue that these guys were interested in anything but this woman as for sex purposes. I can't see a situation with 2 guys like, hey, Officer Jenkins over there, man, she fine. Hey, man, take a look at my schlong. Like I would call cap on that. This other stuff may have happened, but I just can't see like, hey, we exchanging genital pics while this lady is over there. Like, who? I don't know. I would find that odd and it's inconsistent with the rest of this story, just from my standpoint. I don't know what y'all think about it, but I just can't. I would be shocked if that was the actual case here. Yeah, the husband is smart. You gotta stand beside the harlot because the harlot is about to get a payday, and any assets acquired during the course of marriage is marital property. So you know what I would do if I was the good old pastor? I would stand there too, and I would be right beside her. One is great for purposes of this case that he's standing beside her, but 2, why do I gotta fumble and mess my bag up? Like I don't gotta. Like, let's just be a buck, okay? Let's all be honest. If your significant other was an alleged trollywop, scallywag, harlot, Jezebel, whatever you want to call it, if that's what your significant other did, but this lawsuit is being filed, and this lawsuit is naming something I talked about in another video, respondeat superior, because the officers were on duty, because it was during the course of the employments, the city is named as a defendant. That was one of the first things we saw in the lawsuit. Man, I'm gonna be like, this lousy son of a I'll be like, this, you know what? She ain't ish, but I'm gonna hang out because I gotta see how this lawsuit thing gonna play out before I decide to pull an usher and ready to sign them papers. That's just me. So I think we gotta give the good pastor a little bit of credit here. Everybody like, oh, this dude is simp, he should be God. I'm gonna be honest. Nah, I think he's strategic. If I were a divorce attorney and he came to me like, man, I'm leaving this trap. This man, I can't stay with this man. This broad is completely. I'm getting out of here. I'd be like, man, no, you're not. You're gonna sit there. You're gonna suck it up and play the good husband role. And then once you take that good husband role and that check come in, then you come back and talk to me. that's. I'm thinking that's what it was. Now it appears to be the opposite though. That was one thing you think he was into that type of stuff. But according to this, now we got to understand this is her variation of the story. But there's several instances where her husband walked in because one of the guys who got suspended, she had a relationship with this guy and his wife. And at some point in the complaint, Officer Hall, no, at some point in the complaint, Officer Hall's husband walks in while Officer Hall is like butt naked with this guy's wife. And there's a discussion of how he clearly didn't approve of it, how he was trying to talk her out of it, X, Y, and Z. It never put him as being there when a lot of this conduct occurred, which is crazy as hell. Because I'll be like, what? You want to go on a boat with a bunch of male police officers and I ain't gonna be there? I mean, you better go sit your ass down somewhere. But hey, that's just me. That's just me. He didn't know of a result in the bag, but what he gonna do? He ain't gonna probably he just gonna storm out and leave that day. Like, no. I mean, if I was him, I wouldn't. What are you gonna do? Storm out and leave? No, I'm not storming out and leaving because this is my house. If anybody gonna leave, you gonna leave. that would be my position if I was him. But she probably hung around. Hey, they probably had a conversation. They probably thought after she lost that job at the restaurant, she's like, how can I turn this into a bag? And I think he's doing the smart thing to stay around to get that bag. I think that's man, that husband ain't doing nothing on the side, just sitting there crying about all that BBC his wife was. But all right, let's take a look. Let's take a look. Let's go back to the complaint because it's gonna get really interesting and quite nasty as hell. Okay. But a male officer describing to the superior that he wanted to take care of her, that they want to smash. The officer sharing the picture. On multiple occasions, Sergeant Watson made sexually explicit comments to Hall. For example, he commented on her tattoos and asked if she had any others. Hall responded that they were under a uniform. Hall then asked to see them and provided his personal number. That's how it always starts. All right. During her employment, Ms. Hall was groomed to engage in sexually exploitative activities by men in the department, including Sergeant Powell, Sergeant McGowan, and Chief Davis. Sexual activity between subordinates and superiors within the bureaucratic hierarchy of authority should be examined as a potential abuse of authority. And they got a quote there because that's coming directly out of a statute, which is the basis for the lawsuit that they bring in. The superior officer and the bureaucratic blah, 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 blah. All right. Sexual grooming is the process of deliberately establishing a connection with an individual in order to prepare that person for sexual exploitation and or abuse. Now, this was actually good, but they lay out the 7 stages of grooming process, selecting a victim where they find someone who is vulnerable, where they have power over. The next one is gathering information. Once the sexual predator has selected their target, the next stage is the grooming process and developing a personal relationship to identify the target's needs and vulnerabilities. And we'll see later on at one point, she explained to one of them, hey, me and my husband are buying a house and this process is stressing us out. And in true trying to smash fashion, he was like, oh, if they stressing you out and you need something, allegedly, this is what she said. He said, if you need something, I can give you something your husband can't. All right, number 3, gaining personal connection. Next, the predator uses the information gained to engage with their target and an us-only information and activity designed to build trust, meeting the need or establishing credentials. Okay, priming the target. Next, the predator uses their established credibility to increase emotional dependence while engaging in escalating non-sexual touching, dirty jokes, conversations, flirting, and innuendo, creating a victim, instigating sexual conduct, controlling the victim. Okay, sexual grooming by Powell. Now, Powell is the one who she went around bragging about after they had an encounter that I believe it occurred on department property. She went around bragging about his manhood. But I'm gonna go into this one because this one is probably the most egregious. I'm gonna go to him. I'll bypass the others, but I want to talk a little bit about the chief because the chief was the worst perpetrator in all of this. And it was two things. One, he potentially, if her facts as alleged are true, I'm gonna give her the benefit of the doubt until I can see what the answer is to this complaint. But if her facts as alleged are true, he had knowledge of the mental health issues and he had knowledge of everything. And he went out of his way to conceal it and try to get some. He was like kind of that creepy guy because, like, man, why is she smashing everybody but me type of guy? So let's start with Sergeant Powell. During Mrs. Hall employment, Sergeant Powell was one of her supervisors. Again, they're going to create that power imbalance. Sergeant Powell is more than 15 years older. He's 6'2", 220 pounds. He identified Miss Hall as a young, vulnerable woman in a department dominated by aggressive older men. They just landed on too, which is smart on their part. Sergeant Powell used his position as second shift supervisor to befriend Miss Hall and learn about Miss Hall's desire to become a crime suppression unit officer. In early March 2022, Sergeant Powell targeted Miss Hall for sexual exploitation by abusing his knowledge for her personal circumstances, professional aspirations, and psychological vulnerabilities to coerce her into sexual activity. Sergeant Powell learned that Miss Hall was going through the process of buying a home with her husband and that this process was extremely taxing in their relationship. Sergeant Powell positioned himself as a reliable source of companionship and advice regarding Miss Hall's career and her marriage. Get it? Really? Sergeant Powell contacted Miss Hall through Facebook Messenger and offered his personal cell phone number. You can tell he old as hell. He gonna contact her through Facebook Messenger. Sergeant Powell complimented Miss Hall's physique and offered to show her workout techniques, consistent with every personal trainer ever. Okay, on or around March 15th, 2022, Sergeant Powell would bring up the topic of sex while he was on patrol with Officer Hall. He stated that he had played the game before and could keep it cool at work. During such conversations, Sergeant Powell directly propositioned Miss Hall for the first time. He stated that it's just sex. I can give you what your husband can't give you. Miss Hall responded that she was not interested. Sergeant Powell persisted in his request for sex despite Miss Hall's resistance. Sergeant Powell stated that he was taking an interest in Miss Hall and that Miss Hall reminded him of himself when he first started at the department. Miss Hall looked up to Sergeant Powell, professional role model, authority figure. Despite Miss Hall's repeated denial, Sergeant Powell texting Miss Hall during shift about how they could have a secret. Excuse me, I'm slipping on a little bit of brew, so I don't want to belch all in the microphone. About how he could keep this sexual relationship secret. Eventually, Miss Hall gave in to Sergeant Powell's request for sexual favors. Sergeant Powell told Miss Hall to come in early for a jiu-jitsu training at an off-site facility used for the department for such purposes. When Miss Hall arrived, Sergeant Powell kissed Miss Hall, then pressured her to perform all sex. Miss Hall expressed concerns about the fact that they were engaging in this activity in a public place, but reluctantly agreed. Miss Hall explicitly stated that she did not want Sergeant Powell to, skeet in her mouth, despite her expressed limitations. Sergeant Powell forcibly held Miss Hall's head down and, hey, he shot up the club. Within days of the jiu-jitsu training, Sergeant Powell took Miss Hall to his truck after shift for another sexual encounter. She expressed boundaries by requiring the use of a condom. Sergeant Powell agreed not to shoot up the club. I'm trying to keep it clean. That's why I ain't even got no monetization on this thing, because this might go left real quick. He agreed not to shoot up her club. However, during sex, Sergeant Powell removed the condom, forcibly held Miss Hall into place, and shot up the club, so to speak. He said it was okay because he had a vasectomy. That's wild. Again, this is her variation of the facts. We haven't got an answer to this yet. On another occasion, while engaged in sexual activity, Miss Hall noticed that Sergeant Powell was photographing and video recording her without her consent. She became upset and demanded that he delete the data. Sergeant Powell assured her that he deleted the data, but based on the investigative report by the firm that they hired, Frost, Brown, and Todd, blah, 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 that's the firm they hired to do the investigation, at least one of those non-consensual, intimate visual depictions ended up in the possession of Sergeant McGowan and Chief Davis. Sergeant Powell regularly instructed Ms. Hall to delete text messages related to the relationship. Sergeant Powell persistently asked for sex during the shift or whenever those two were alone. Like, yes, that's if that's going down, that's how it normally goes. Sergeant Powell would engage in sexually charged communications involving descriptions of sex acts on several occasions between March and October of 2022. When Miss Hall would make a mistake on duty, Sergeant Powell excused her mistake on the condition that she performed sex acts on him. He threatened that if anyone finds out or if he slept with anyone else, then it's over. Things are going to be different. Work is going to be different. This dude crazy as fuck. Allegedly. Okay, allegedly. I'm trying to give everybody their due diligence and their benefit of the doubt. Sergeant Powell used his authority as supervisor to seclude Miss Hall and coerce her into performing sex acts. On one such occasion, he secluded Miss Hall at the police station, asked to perform oral sex. This dude, like, and Miss Hall declined, but Sergeant Powell would not take no for an answer. He begged her to perform, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. I'm not even going to read that part. Miss Hall felt that she had no choice but to continue to provide sexual favors for Sergeant Powell, so she performed as demanded. Okay. Okay. The sexual relationship with Sergeant Powell impacted Miss Hall's mental health and contributed to worsening her psychiatric symptoms, including anxiety and depression. She felt she couldn't get out of the relationship because Sergeant Powell refused to accept her wishes whenever she told him she didn't want to have sex. On occasion, Miss Hall tried to. This is how you know this dude. If this is alleged is true, I'm like, yeah, this dude was wild. You can tell he had all the crazy person tendencies when he was like, don't mess with nobody else, even though this is some work tryst. But on one occasion, when Miss Hall tried to end the relationship, Sergeant Powell called her while heavily intoxicated. Sergeant Powell was crying and told Miss Hall he drank an entire bottle of Jack Daniels. That's how you know he owed Jack Daniels. He was in the bathroom like, here's some, never mind. He threatened to kill himself. He told Miss Hall, you did this to me, and asserted that Miss Hall was responsible for his imminent suicide. Miss Hall continued to express anxiety, depression, and difficulty in concentrating at work because of her inability to escape the relationship with Sergeant Powell. Memorial Day weekend, she attended a party by another Sergeant Eric Statz with other officers. One officer the only other woman at the party was Officer McGillicuddy's wife, who left the evening. I can't even read now. I sound illiterate. Who left the event early. Miss Hall posted on Facebook a picture of herself in a bathing suit lying on the boat. Sergeant William Watson's commented on her Facebook post like an idiot. Hall and Magoo walked the wife back to the car, then secluded themselves and had sex before returning to the houseboat. When they returned, Officer Maglico, I said Magoo, Officer Maglico digitally penetrated and visibly intoxicated Miss Hall in the hot tub within full view of other LPD officers. After several minutes, Miss Hall pushed the officer away, but he said no. 20 or 30 minutes later, he poured vodka down her throat. They ended up having sexual intercourse in the bathroom of the houseboat, and it just goes left. Powell did not accept her. You owe me. Same crazy shit from Powell, allegedly. Sergeant Powell did not accept Miss Hall's rejection. You owe me. Miss Hall submitted further sexual acts with Sergeant Powell through October, blah, blah, blah. He coerced her despite multiple rejections. Yeah, this dude was a emotional wreck. When Sergeant Powell wanted sex, he refused to take no for an answer. Okay. On July 14th, 2022, she reached out to Sergeant Powell to convey her psychological distress and its impact on her ability to perform her duty. Sergeant Powell told Ms. Hall if she sought for help for her psychological distress, she would be portrayed as a weak female officer and no one would trust her. He warned her against reporting her issues and advised her to suck it up. I'm immature. Suck it up and focus on work. Within hours after the call, Sergeant Powell, Miss Hall was involved in an on-duty collision. She kept crashing the car, blah, 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 which was terrible. That car crash, she had multiple car crashes. Apparently, she couldn't drive either. She had multiple car crashes, and she asserts that that was something that the leadership really held over her head, like, oh, you won't get promoted because you keep wrecking these vehicles during the course of your duty, and it's actually your fault. Now, this goes on and on. It's funny because hey, see, y'all see exactly how I felt. Once you read this and you hear her facts as alleged, you like, it gets wilder. Now I'm gonna fast forward and I'm gonna give the truncated version of the police chief. But the police chief, one, it makes 100% sense why he got fired because he had notice of all this. He was exchanging in conversations with all of the superiors, all the sergeants, all of the leadership who was involved in this matter. He even had a burner phone that he referred to as "old boy," where he used to communicate with these other people, to communicate, send pictures along. He recommended her to start the OnlyFans and some foot website and the whole nine. He was the biggest idiot of them all because he actually had notice, and had he done the right thing, he would have had his job. All the rest of those guys would have been screwed. All the rest of those guys would have been screwed. But at least he had a position with notice early on to do something about it. And this dude just like dropped the ball big time. So let me fast forward to just some of the stuff. We're not going to talk about his grooming because, all right, Chief Davis. Let me see. Let's see. See, look, it's crazy too because now they got all his text messages. So Chief Davis encouraged this behavior and shared in the pornography and sexual fantasy of mutually abusing Miss Hall with his trusted supervisor McGowan. Chief Davis told investigators that in a text exchange dated October 25th, Sergeant McGowan sent him a photo of a black male foot inside of Officer Hall's mouth. Immediately thereafter, Chief Davis said the following exchange occurred between he and Sergeant McGowan. Chief Davis, who that? Country. Chief Davis, who that? Sergeant McGowan. Hall, Lewis. Chief Davis, he on it again. Sergeant McGowan, he swears he ain't. Chief Davis, she nor her husband took that picture. Sergeant McGowan, she has a tight little you know what though. And Chief Davis, yep. So they got all this fool text messages. and this is online. You can literally Google it and read it. But all of this stuff is online. Chief Davis had the biggest opportunity. And right here, Exhibit B, an independent investigative report demonstrated that text exchange between Chief Davis, he became frustrated by his comparative failure to groom Miss Hall for sexual exploitation. Like I said, he was the creepy guy who was like, why is she having sex with everybody but me? And his repeated attempts to seclude Miss Hall, but he wasn't getting any. She wasn't going for it with Chief Davis. And I mean, he was literally the biggest culprit because he sat in the senior position where he had a chance and an opportunity to do something to actually to actually rectify. Hey man, this isn't about people's kinks, all right? We talk about the legalities of the case and why you should keep your privates and your purse and your wallet completely separate. Completely separate. But it's kind of wild. These guys are fucked. Pardon my language. These guys are screwed royally. If you go look in a complaint, it essentially alleges several counts of various equal protection because she was a woman, because they were abuse of authority, because they abused her authority. As relief, they didn't actually name a dollar amount. They just said that they want the dollar amount to be completely up to the jury. So when they were asking for the dollar amount to be up to the jury, when you had these civil lawsuits in a lot of states, sometimes there's a limit on the maximum amount of recovery that could be handed down, but jurors aren't really aware of that. So a lot of times if a case does go to trial, the jury say, hey, we say damages of $5 million. And if the threshold was $3 million, they just give her whatever that maximum was. These officers ain't got it. I already know. But the city of Lavergne Police Department, the city of Lavergne in general, not their police department, they got it. They'll pull out whatever that settlement is. I mean, let's just keep it a buck. Hey, for as far as the attorney thing go, I think it's a hell of a case. I think it's a great case. I think her attorneys were very tactful in who they selected to include. I think they were very aware of the demographic of the population and who would comprise the jury, and they used it to their advantage. Bottom line is, let me see. Yeah, she gonna get a big ass payday, and I'm gonna keep it a buck, okay? Like, I'm interested to see what the answer is, because one side files a complaint alleging this, the other side has a chance to respond in the documents, and they'll file an answer. Hey, you alleging this? This is our version of the facts. So I'm gonna be interested to see when that pops up, because I want to know what their variations of the facts are. The other thing is, I'm gonna just be honest. In these types of cases, when you got like foots and miles and all of this stuff going on and it's getting crazy, they using text messages and burner phones, or like nobody can find it. There are going to be texts out there. So if there are text messages out there where she appears to be the person who's actively setting these things up, she seems to be the proactive party. Because when you initially look at all the complaints came out, they were written in a manner where she engaged in a sexual relationship with him. She engaged in a relationship with A, B, C, D, and E. According to this report, it looked like they had to flip it around. And now, according to not this report, but according to her complaint, she shined a completely different light on it, which, as y'all read it, it makes you kind of view the shit in a little bit of a different light. The bottom line, who's at fault for this? Hey, fellas, the onus goes on y'all, because y'all just gotta fucking know better. Let's just keep it 100%. Like in the words of Mr. DFD, when he told me my curfew, I didn't have one, but I fit the description. Hey, you a black male, and this is a small white woman and a small rural police department. If something goes down, they're going to make an example out of your ass. That's just common sense. That's the name of the game. That's how it goes. Yeah, they already know the county pan, especially once they see how those big black bucks treated that innocent snowflake, man. Hey, perception, man, is about the narrative, man. What is the narrative going to say? The narrative just don't look good, man. These dudes look huge in their damn police picture. I read it and I was like, it paints a completely different narrative from what we saw initially in the story, where it kind of made her look like the person who was just kind of initiating all these things. But as a bunch of brothers, and Mr. Perez, I'm putting you in the brother category too, because your name is Perez. Y'all gotta fucking know better, man. You have to know better. You have to know that. I say it all the time, and I tell young professionals who are minorities, like, yo, you don't have the leverage and the wiggle room to make the same mistakes that other people may make mistakes for. You're gonna, if something happens, you are going to be the example. You're going to be the person who they make the damn example out of. All of this stuff could have been avoided had they elected to keep their, over here and keep their wallet over here. But sometimes they were thinking with the wrong head, clearly, and all their asses got fired. They all are jokes. They probably can't get jobs anywhere, and they're going to be on the hook, joint and several liability if this goes to court. If they lose in this lawsuit, excuse me, that just means joint and several liability means that if she wins, we don't give a damn who we get the money from. Officer A could pay a 10%, the county could pay 70%, but y'all gonna pay y'all gonna pay. And typically what will happen is the county will pay the bulk of the lawsuit, then the county will go against the other defendants to try to get some money back. But those brothers ain't gonna get it, because we're gonna be talking millions of dollars here in this particular case. So I thought this was a wild ass case. I thought that just going through that complaint changed the narrative from what we've been seeing in the media, because the media initial narrative was kind of painting her out as a a trollop, if you will, a Jezebel, an alleged trollop, an alleged Jezebel. Now, when we see her variation of the facts, or what she asserts to be the facts, it paints a really different picture. I think the answer probably would be out. I'm thinking maybe, and because I looked at the date that it was filed, most time they got 30 days to file an answer, more or less. It depends. They can ask for more time, but I'm thinking maybe in 2 to 3 weeks we should see something pop up as to what the other version of the facts are. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays. Uh, exactly. I mean, I'm gonna put most of the blame on them. Like, come on now. I talked about this. I talked about this before in videos. As a professional, especially when I was young, most times, even now, and I'm old, but most times I'm probably the youngest male minority. I'm probably the only male minority in the room, but I'm probably the youngest too. And you have to be really strategic and tactful about how you want to move. It was a reason as a young attorney, I'd be like, nah, I'm gonna leave my door open because you just never know. I don't want any accusations to come up. I don't want an allegation to come up. Because if it comes up, fellas, the worst thing you can do, the worst thing that can happen to you is you had to defend the accusation for something that didn't happen. That's some bullshit. You know what I mean? And that's just kind of how it is. But in these settings, it comes up all the time. I remember there was and I don't think I ever told this story before, but there was like someone filed like an anonymous complaint when I was at a job saying that I was showing someone preferential treatment. Now, complaints aren't anonymous. People know where the hell they come from. People have means to find out. Nothing is anonymous out there. But luckily, I had the foresight to be able to see. I knew I knew the pettiness of with which I was dealing with people in the office. There was a lot of people mad because they was old as hell and they weren't put in charge, and I was put in charge. There's a lot of people hell. Hey, women, women, y'all get mad if some new woman start a job. I don't know what it is with older women, but if a new woman start a job, oh man, that creates a big ass problem. But I had the foresight to know what I was working with as far as these special group of buffoons that I was working with. And so I had the authority to hire by just sign a letter, get my superiors to sign off on it, and it was done. But because I look like this, but I'm not stupid. Because I knew what I was working with, I was like, I'm not writing no letter to just hire anybody. I'm not doing that. Everybody's going to have to go through the process. Everybody's going to have to go through an interview. I'm not sitting on an interview panel. I don't want to be the deciding person. We're going to take whoever get the highest damn score. And you know what that did? That insulated me from any type of nonsense. Like no one that could ever put me in a position say, oh, he hired this person because he knew them or because they were favorable. Because like, nah, everybody went through the process and you have to have that foresight. You have to know what you're dealing with. Is especially in those type of work environments. But a lot of times those environments have been male dominated environments. And I'm not saying that these guys did that. These are just allegations at this point. But y'all already know how it was, man. The stuff I saw in the military, I was like, oh man, y'all will get canceled like hell for that now. And that wasn't even that long ago. We talk about like 2005, 2006. But hey, the moral of this story is, hey, keep your head on the swivel, keep your genitalia over there, keep your wallet over there, because you do not want to lose your livelihood due to some stupidity. At the end of the day, I'm already gonna tell y'all how this gonna go. She gonna get broke off with a big ass bag. She gonna sign some type of non-disclosure agreement where she can't disclose the amount of the settlement, where she can't disclose what happened. She's gonna go off and live somewhere. And I wouldn't be shocked if the good pastor, he may or may not, I don't know, but I wouldn't be shocked if her husband, the good pastor, ultimately filed for divorce once that nice bag came through, since it would be considered a marital asset. Yo, that's it. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Hey, crazy ass story, crazy ass time. But, hey, fellas, all y'all guys involved in this, y'all play stupid ass games and y'all won stupid prizes. Y'all take care, be blessed, have a good weekend. Peace.